back. What is with this ear? Welcome back to my channel. It's so nice to see you, Rosebuds. I decided tonight to film the next chapters that we will be reading. I just did the first and second one, and I'll link that in the description. And I was still up, and I thought, you know what, maybe I'll film the second one and have that already ready and post that pretty soon. So we are going to be reading chapter 3 and maybe chapter 4. I forget how long they are between things, but we'll see. We'll see how far we get through it. I'm gonna just talk in like a really soft-spoken voice, and I really hope you are relaxed and enjoy. And yeah, in the last chapter, I would recommend watching the very first Everlost reading story. We are reading Everlost, and we are going to be starting in chapter 3. If you haven't heard the first and second, go watch the other one. And so yeah, I'm not gonna actually talk about where we left off because I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just gonna start reading. Alright. So, chapter 3, Dreamless. So, chapter 3, Dreamless. Dreamless. lich, having been so long in his special forest, never had the chance to read any of the Mary Hightower's brilliantly instructional books. I just forgot. There's a little box right here, and I'm going to read that right now, really quick. Okay. Mary Hightower, also known as Mary Queen of Snots. What? Mary Hightower, also known as Mary Queen of Snots, writes in her book, Sorta Dead, that there's no easy way to tell new arrivals to Everlost that technically they are no longer alive. If you come across a green soul, as new arrivals are called, it's best to just be honest and hit them with the truth quickly, Mary writes. If necessary, you have to confront them with something they can't deny. Otherwise, they just keep on refusing to believe it, and they make themselves miserable. Waking up in Everlost is like jumping into a cold pool. It's a shock at first, but once you're in, the water is fine. Alright, and now we will continue on to chapter 3. So, chapter 3, Dreamless. Dreamless. lich, having been so long in his special forest, never had the chance to read any of Mary Hightower's brilliantly instructional books. Most everything he knew about Everlost he had learned from experience. For instance, he had quickly learned that dead spots, that is, places that only the dead can see, are the only places that feel solid to the touch. He could swing from the branches of his dead forest, but once he got past its borders to where the living trees were, he would pass right through them as if they weren't there, or, more accurately, like he wasn't there. He didn't need to read Mary Hightower's tips for taps to know that you only need to breathe when you're talking, or that the only pain you can still feel is pain of the heart, or that memories you don't hold tightly onto were soon lost. He knew all too well about the memory part. The worst part about it was that no matter how much time passed, you always remembered how many things you'd forgotten. Today, however, he had learned something new. Today, Leaf learned how long green souls slept before waking to their new afterlife. He had started a count on the day they arrived, and as of this morning, it was 272 days. 9 months. 9 months? Allie yelled. Are you kidding me? I don't think he's the kidding type, said Nick, who appeared to be actually shivering from the chilliness of the news. I was surprised too, Leaf told them. I thought you'd never wake up. He didn't tell them how every day for 9 months he'd kicked and prodded them and hit them with sticks, hoping it would jar them awake. The best kept to himself. Think of it this way, he said. It took 9 months to get you born, so doesn't it figure it would take 9 months to get you dead? I don't even remember dreaming, Nick said, trying hopelessly to loosen his tie. Now Allie was shaking a bit, too, at this news of her own death. We don't dream, Leaf informed them, so you never have to worry about nightmares. Why have nightmares, said Allie, when you're in one? Could all this be true? Could she really be dead? No, she wasn't. If she was dead, she would have made it into the light at the end of the tunnel. Both of them would have. They were only half dead. Nick kept rubbing his face. This chocolate, I can't get it off my face. It's like a tattoo there. It is, Leaf said. It's how you died. What? It's just like your clothes, Leaf explained. It's a part of you now. Nick looked at him like he'd just pronounced a life sentence. You mean to tell me that I'm stuck with a chocolate face in my father's ugly necktie until the end of time? Leaf nodded, but Nick wasn't ready to believe him. He reached for his tie and tried to undo it with all his strength. Of course, the knot didn't give at all. He tried to undo the buttons on his shirt. No luck there either. Leaf laughed, and Nick threw him an unamused gaze. The more frustrated Nick and Allie became, the harder Leaf worked to please them. He brought them to his treehouse, hoping it might bring them out of their sour mood. Leaf had built it himself out of the ghost branches that littered the ground of the dead forest. He showed them how to climb up to the highest platform, and when they got there, he pushed them both off, laughing as they bounced off tree limbs and hit the ground. Then he jumped and did the same, thinking they'd both be laughing hysterically when he got there, but they were not. For Allie, the fall was the most terrifying moment she had to endure. It was worse than the crash, for that had been over so quickly she had no time to react. It was worse than the Greyhound bus passing through her, because that too had come and gone in a flash. The fall from the tree, however, seemed to last forever. Each branch she had jarred her to her core, jarred her but didn't hurt her. Still, the lack of pain made it no less terrifying. She screamed all the way down, and when at last she smashed upon the hard earth of the dead forest with a hearty thump, she felt the wind knocked out of her, only to realize there was never actually any wind in her to knock out. Nick landed beside her, disoriented, with his eyes spinning like he just came off a carnival ride. Leaf landed beside them, whooping and laughing. "What's wrong with you?" Allie shouted at Leaf, and the fact that he still laughed when she grabbed him and shook him made her even angrier. Allie put her hand to her forehead as if all this was giving her a killer headache. But she couldn't have a headache now, could she? And that just made her all the more aggravated. The rational part of her mind kept wanting to lash out, telling her that this was all a dream, or a misunderstanding, or an elaborate practical joke. Unfortunately, her rational mind had no supporting evidence. She had fallen from a treetop and had not been hurt. She had passed through a greyhound bus. No, her rational mind had to accept the irrational truth. There are rules here, she thought. Rules. Just like the physical world, she would have to learn them. After all, the rules of the living world must have seemed strange when she was very little. Heavy airplanes flew, the sky turned red at sunset. Clouds could hold an ocean full of water, then rain it down on the ground below. Absurd. The living world was no less bizarre than this afterworld. She tried to take some comfort in that, but instead found herself bursting into tears. Poor Allie. Leaf saw her tears and backed away. He had little experience with girls crying, or, if he did, his experience was, at best, 800 years old. He found it highly unexpected and disturbing. "What are you crying for? Or what are you crying for?" he asked her. "It's not like you got hurt when you fell from the tree. That's why I pushed you, to show you it wouldn't hurt." "I want my parents," Allie said. Leaf could see that Nick was fighting his own tears too. This was not at all how Leaf had imagined their first waking day would be, but maybe he should have. Maybe he should have realized that leaving one's life behind is not an easy thing to do. Leaf supposed he would have missed his parents too, if he could still remember them. He did remember that he used to miss them, though. It wasn't a good feeling. He watched Nick and Allie, waiting for their tears to subside, and that's when the unthinkable occurred to him. "You're not going to stay here, are you?" Nick and Allie didn't answer right away, but that silence was enough of an answer. "You're just like the others," he shouted. Before he even realized what he was going to say, Allie took a step closer to him. "The others?" Leaf silently cursed himself for having said it. He hadn't meant to tell them. He wanted them to think it was just the three of them. That way maybe they would have stayed. Now all his plans were ruined. "What do you mean, others?" Allie said again. "Fine. Leave," Leaf shouted. "I don't care. Anyway, go out there and sink into the center of the earth for all I care. That's what happens, you know. If you're not careful, you sink and sink and sink and sink all the way to the center of the earth." Nick wiped away the last of his tears. "How would you know? All you know is how to swing from trees. You haven't been anywhere. You don't know anything. Leaf bolted away from them. He climbed his tree to the highest perch of the slimmest branches. They won't leave, he told himself. They won't leave because they need me. They need me to teach them to climb and to swing. They need me to show them how to live without being alive. Here, on his high perch, Leaf kept his special things, the handful of precious items that had made the journey with him, crossing from the living world into Everlost. These were the things he had found when he woke up after the flood that had taken his life. Ghost things that he could touch and feel. They kept him connected to his fading memories. There was a shoe that had been his father's. He often put it on his own foot, wishing that someday he would grow into it, but knowing that he never would. There was a water-damaged tin picture of himself, the only thing he had to remember what he looked like. It was pocked with so many spots, he couldn't tell which spots were dirt and which were freckles. In the end, he just assumed that they were all freckles. Finally, there was a rabbit's foot that was apparently no more lucky for him than it had been for the rabbit. There had been once a nickel, but it had been stolen by the first kid he came across in Everlost. As if money had any value to them anymore. He had found all these items marooned on the small dead spot he had woken on, and when he had stepped off the little spot of dried mud onto living land, his feet had begun to sink. The sinking was the first lesson he had learned. You had to keep moving or down you went. You had to keep moving or down you went. He had kept moving, afraid to stop, afraid to sleep, crossing from towns to woods and back to towns. He had come to understand his ghostly nature, and although it terrified him, he endured it. For what else could he do? Why was he a ghost and not an angel? Why did he not go to heaven? That's what the preacher always says. Heaven or hell, those were the only choices. So then why was he still on Earth? He asked himself these questions over and over until he tired of asking and just accepted it. Then he had found the forest, a huge dead spot large enough to make his home. It was a place where he could actually feel the trees, a place where he did not sink. And he knew in his heart that the good Lord had provided him with this forest. It was personal share. It was his personal share of eternity. As for these new kids, they would spend forever with him. It was the design of things. They might leave now, but once they saw what the rest of the world was like, they would come back to him, and he would build them their own platforms in the trees, and they would laugh together, and they would talk and talk and talk and talk, to make up all for the years Leaf had existed in silence. Down below, Nick had watched Leaf climb up the tree until he disappeared into the lush canopy. Nick found himself trying to balance his feelings of sympathy for the boy with his own confused feelings about being dead. He felt queasy and wondered how that could be if, technically, he didn't actually have a stomach anymore. The thought just made him even more queasy. "Well," said Allie, "this sucks." Nick let loose an unexpected guffaw, which made Allie giggle. How could they be laughing at a time like this? "We have some decisions to make," said ally. Nick didn't exactly feel in a decision-making frame of mind. "You think it's possible to have a post-traumatic stress disorder if you're dead?" he asked. Ally had no answer. Nick looked at his hands, which were smudged with everlasting chocolate like his face. He rubbed his arm. If he had no fleshy body, why could he still feel his own skin? Or maybe it was just a memory of skin. And what about all the things people told him in life about what happened to you when you died? Not that he was certain about any of it. His father had been an alcoholic who found God, and it changed his life forever. Had changed his life. His mother was into New Age stuff and believed in reincarnation and crystals. Nick always found himself caught in some uncomfortable in-between. He had faith in faith, though. That is to say, he deeply believed that someday he'd find something to deeply believe. That someday never came for Nick. Instead, he wound up here, and this place didn't fit with either of his parents' versions of the afterlife. And then, of course, there was his friend Ralphie Sherman, who claimed to have had a near-death experience. According to Ralphie, we're all briefly reincarnated as insects, and the light at the end of the tunnel is actually a bug zapper. Well, this place was not purgatory, nirvana, or any sort of rebirth, and it occurred to Nick that regardless of what people believed, the universe had its own ideas. "At least now we know there's an afterlife," Ellie said, but Nick shook his head. "This isn't the afterlife," he said. "We never made it to the afterlife. This is kind of an interlife. A space between life and death." Nick thought back to that light he had seen at the end of the tunnel before he had crashed into Allie on the way. The light had been his destination. He still didn't know what was in that light, Jesus or Buddha or the light of a hospital delivery room where he would be reborn. Would he ever know? What if we're lost here forever? He asked. Allie scowled at him. "Are you always so full of gloom and doom?" "Usually." Nick looked at the forest around them. Was this such a bad place to spend eternity? It wasn't exactly paradise, but it was kind of pretty. The trees were full and lush. They'd never lose their leaves. He wondered if the weather of the living world could still affect him. If not, then it wouldn't be so bad staying here. Certainly the boy they called Leaf had adjusted, so couldn't they? But then, that wasn't the real question. The question was, did they want to? Leaf waited in his treehouse and soon they climbed up to him, as he knew they would. He quickly hid his special things as Nick and Ellie reached the platform, both of them huffing and puffing as if they were out of breath. "Stop that," he told them. "You're not out of breath. You just think you are. So stop it." "Leaf, please, this is important," Ellie said. "We need you to tell us about the others you were talking about before." There was no sense trying to hide it now, so he told them what he knew. "They come through my forest every once in a while, other kids on their way places. They never stay long, and none have come through here for years." Where do they go? Anywhere. They're always running. They're always running from the McGill. The what? The McGill. Is that a grown-up? Leaf shook his head. No grown-ups here. Only kids. Kids and monsters. Monsters, said Nick. That's great. That's wonderful. I'm so glad I asked. But Allie wasn't shaken. There are no such things as monsters, she told Leaf. He looked at Allie, then to Nick, then back to Allie again. There are here. And that's the end of chapter 3. Alright, that was the end of chapter 3. I'm going to stop there because it's getting a little bit loud outside and I should really start heading to bed, so I hope you enjoyed that chapter. We get to know a little bit more about this world and what's going on. So Allie and Nick are dead. They're talking to Leaf more. Leaf is opening up. He just told him that there's monsters. The McGill. So, can't wait to continue on this book with you all. And I'll see you later on another book reading episode. So, bye. I love you all. Good night. 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 Love you all.